welcome everybody. It's August 24th, 2025, and this is the last in a series of 6 discussions about science from the standpoint of Lyndon LaRouche. Today, we're going to be talking about ChatGPT, AI, and what's different between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. So what if I told you that despite all the progress that we've seen during the 20th century and this century and the 21st, that we're actually far behind where we could have been? And that we're that progress in music didn't have to stop with the death of Brahms. That in the 80 years since the end of World War II, in the 80 years since Never Again, look what we're facing again today. So how did we get here, and what relationship do these things have with what relationship do these things have with each other? So we're going to start off with hearing from Lyndon LaRouche about what helped cause this terrible change in the year 1900. And it was at the meeting of the International Mathematical Congress, which, as we all know, is the source of great evil in the world. I don't fully mean that. Okay, so let's get someone to read. What we can start with. Are we good to use this thing and start in the room? Okay, so we're going to read from the beginning of the reader. And this is from LaRouche's 2014 paper, The Incompetence of 20th Century Science Education.
Buddy in the room here willing to read.
Yep.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, this is Lyndon LaRouche, The Incompetence of 20th Century Science Education from 2014. A great and largely continuing catastrophe for all modern science throughout the world had begun in Paris, France, since the opening of the 20th century. It had been launched by a scientifically weak-minded David Hilbert, delivered from the platform of that year, 1900's International Mathematical Congress, held in Paris at that time. The foolish Hilbert had abandoned and implicitly rejected all actual physical science. He had done that for the sake of a silly pursuit of a merely mathematics program without any actual physical science, thus abandoning and implicitly outlawing all competent progress in physical science. From that time onwards, transatlantic science has been, and that chiefly increasingly so, an often actually criminal farce, perpetrated against the very name of a polluted, mere caricature of actual science, a fraud conducted in the favor of what was, to repeat, quote, unquote, merely mathematics. Travesty, which had begun with David Hilbert's particular hoax, had launched that year of sheer evils, 1900 AD. This was then soon to be followed by Hilbert's far more evil successor, indeed, most evil man of the 20th century and beyond, Bertrand Russell. Unfortunately, the teaching and practice of the underlying morally wretched principles of practiced attempts at mere mathematics have since tended to persist, as still presently as a demanded replacement in high schools and universities, that for nearly all but a dwindling handful of true geniuses which have survived to have been engaged in truly competent modern science still presently. What the unfortunate Hilbert had already done to this effect had thus become, soon, a greatly worsened product. Then, but even still later, all that at an accelerated rate. This offense against the forward progress of human nature itself has been worsened since that time by the added evil of a dominant role of the increasing trend toward incompetence in generally practiced methods of what is often only merely taught as so-called science, increasingly in merely mathematics, up to the present date. All of this has been done under the presently still continuing decadence of a Bertrand Russell who, even still deader than dead today, reigns in tradition, despite all else, still among the ranks of the reigning royal degenerates of Great Britain, as being their continuing worship of the virtual satans of pseudoscience ever since, all the way to the presently royally imperial day. The product of all this has been, to the present date, a virtual reincarnation of the whore of Babylon for the practice of science in every respect, as so to be judged to be so by her reigning deeds still today. Over the course of the period from the early 1960s up to the present time, the collapse of even a formally taught commitment to a continuing general improvement in the competence in the application of physical science has been rudely, even savagely reversed. That somewhat by such a silly fool as Hilbert, but then rabidly by the outrightly satanic Bertrand Russell, who has soon virtually gobbled up the appeal of the pathetic fool Hilbert. Since then, the consequent of green incompetence has become a dogma of folly, now often predominant in even our own universities generally, even often as a virtually predominant trend in education and related practices. This has been continued as recently accelerated toward a relative nadir through to the present date. The practical application of real science approaches zero. Economic productivity of transatlantic nations has already long been running in the negative. That same pollution in scientific opinion has not only remained dominant to the present date, but has been greatly worsened again and yet again in the halls of our Congress and other influential institutions, despite some important, even precious minorities of exceptions to the present time.
Okay, so David Hilbert, 1900, Bertrand Russell. I don't know how well known these people are at all. Actually, raise your hand if you've ever heard of David Hilbert before. I'm expecting you to speak here.
I don't
Okay, a few. So Hilbert, in 1900, Hilbert was a professor of mathematics at Göttingen. And in 1900 in Paris, he presented a list of what he thought would be real
problems to advance the field of mathematics. We're going to focus on one of them. Well, we're going to read two of them and then focus on one of them. So if I could get an online reader to read, we're going to read from page 5 on the reader. This is David Hilbert's speech in Paris.
Okay, I'll read. Page. Okay, here. At the 1900 International Congress of Mathematicians held in Paris, Göttingen professor David Hilbert presented a series of mathematical problems that he thought would best advance knowledge. There were 23 problems in total, of which he read the first 10 at the conference itself, 437 to 438. Who of us would not be glad to lift the veil behind which the future lies hidden, to cast a glance at the next advances of our science and at the secrets of its development during future centuries? What particular goals will there be toward which the leading mathematical spirits of coming generations will strive? What new methods and new facts in the wide and rich field of mathematical thought will the new centuries disclose? For the close of a great epoch not only invites us to look back into the past, but also directs our thoughts to the unknown future. The deep significance of certain problems for the advance of mathematical science in general, and the important role which they play in the work of the individual investigator are not to be denied. 440 to 441. Are these page numbers or paragraph numbers?
Page numbers, you don't need to read them.
Okay. It remains to discuss briefly what general requirements may be justly laid down for the solution of a mathematical problem. I should say, first of all, this, that it shall be possible to establish the correctness of the solution by means of a finite number of steps based upon a finite number of hypotheses which are implied in the statement of the problem and which must always be exactly formulated. This requirement of logical deduction by means of a finite number of processes is simply the requirement of rigor in reasoning. On the contrary, I think that wherever from the side of the theory of knowledge or in geometry, or from the theories of natural or physical science, mathematical ideas come up.
Actually, go ahead and jump to the next one, please, Richard, 447.
The compatibility of the arithmetical axioms. When we are engaged in investigating the foundations of a science, we must set up a system of axioms which contains an exact and complete description of the relations subsisting between the elementary ideas of that science. The axioms so set up are at the same time the definitions of those elementary ideas, and no statement within the realm of the science whose foundation we are testing is held to be correct unless it can be derived from those axioms by means of a finite number of logical steps. Upon closer consideration, the question arises whether in any way certain statements of single axioms depend upon one another, and whether the axioms may not therefore contain certain parts in common, which must be isolated if one wishes to arrive at a system of axioms that shall be altogether independent of one another. But above all, I wish to designate the following as the most important among the numerous questions which can be asked with regard to the axioms. To prove that they are not contradictory, that is, that a finite number of logical steps based upon them can never lead to contradictory results.
Okay, let's stop there. This isn't the easiest thing we've read in this series for sure. For anybody who's if this is your first time reading this, then what does anyone have any idea of what's Hilbert proposing with this part 2 here, this number 2?
I mean, don't bother with any experiments. Look it up and see if you can logically deduce it from the rules, you know?
Okay. Any other ideas about, yeah, Sarah?
Well, he's saying we start from this idea that we must set up a system of axioms which contains an exact and complete description of the relations between these elementary ideas. So that language there to me says we have to know what we're trying to know before we think that we're trying to know it.
And we're gonna know it by unveiling.
Yeah,
Pulling the
Very
veil.
good. We have to already know everything before we could do.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Rick, what do you want to say?
Basically the same thing, also prove its own consistency.
Hugh, you've got your hand raised. What
Yes.
would you like to add?
It sounds to me like the logical fallacy of begging the question, in the sense that only if the answer is embedded in the question can it be valid. So it sounds like a logical fallacy right from the start.
Okay. We got someone writing in also from in the chat. Morgan says it's anti-learning, isn't it? The British model. And good morning in Harrisburg, Brian. Okay, so well, I think what Sarah said really hit the nail on the head. What Hilbert is trying to do here is say, can we come up with a list of assumptions, axioms, and if we knew all of them, we'd be able to deduce every true thing. So you seem to think that that's not likely going to work. Right? You seem a bit dubious about this. What's wrong with that?
Well, if it's about science, science is the study of how things work. So if we set up a system of inquiry that's based on what we already know, then we're not really trying to inquire about anything.
Yeah. You know what? It's amazing how simple it is to take this apart, and yet it had an enormous influence. Let's see, actually, could you also read the number 6? Because part 2 is about arithmetic. Let's see what he says about physics in part 6 there. All right. Could you read just that paragraph from page 454, the first paragraph?
454, the first paragraph.
Yeah, back on the right column.
Yeah.
Sorry, got it. Mathematical treatment of the axioms of physics. The investigations on the foundations of geometry suggest the problem to treat in the same manner, by means of axioms, those physical sciences in which mathematics plays an important part.
So, yes, he's explicitly saying not just math, but here he's saying physics also. We need to find these axioms. Now, this is not a good way to discover new things. This is sort of ignoring. Leibniz made a distinction that there's sort of 2 types of reasoning. He called it the ars judicandi, the art of making judgments. So if you've got an idea, can you see whether it's true or not? But then there's also a different act, which is the art veniendi, the art of invention. So how do you come up with that new idea before you can test out whether it's true or not, but where did it come from in the first place? And that's just not here in what Hilbert is doing. Stuart, you've got your hand raised? Go ahead. Stuart Lewis, you got your hand raised. Did you mean to, would you like to speak? Okay, well, Stuart, you can just unmute yourself and speak if you'd like. All right, Mary Jane.
A finite number of logical steps based upon them can never lead to contradictory results. Isn't that the whole idea of scientific discovery, is to find contradictions?
It sure is, isn't it? So let's compare. I'm going to talk for. Let's put the mic here. So sort of a. Let's compare. Sorry, rough day. Let's compare what Hilbert did, and then so Bertrand Russell, who LaRouche has called the most evil man of the 20th century, the man who wanted to preemptively nuke the Soviet Union while we had the bomb.
Jason, can you adjust the mic? Sorry.
Okay, are you not? Do you hear me tapping this?
It's going in and out a little bit,
Okay.
and it's a little weaker sometimes than it should be.
Well, let me, if so, let's just see. I think it's on this mic. It might not be. Let's try it. If you're not hearing me, let me know, and we'll just pass around the speakerphone. Tapping doesn't work. Okay, people just aren't hearing this. No, it says it's paired. Okay, we'll just use this time.
We hear you over here.
Okay, well, different. Okay, so could be you, Gretchen. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, right. It's a mix.
All right. So, all right, let's continue with what I was saying here. So, David Hilbert proposed that we figure out how to turn all of arithmetic into logic, so that instead of thinking about numbers, we're thinking about rules of transforming strings of text into other strings of text, which is essentially what logic becomes, rules of transforming text. Bertrand Russell thought this was a great idea. Bertrand Russell, one more quote about Russell. This is from his biographer, Ray Monk, who liked Russell, at least when he started writing his biography. He said, on reflection, the second thought that has come to dominate my reaction to Russell, particularly in the latter half of his life, is how emotionally maimed he was. He was, it sometimes seems, simply not capable of loving another human being. So here's Bertrand Russell. So what Russell did was in 1895, I think we talked about this last time, in 1895, he wrote a paper attacking Riemann's habilitation dissertation, which we had read last week. Hilbert didn't like, Russell didn't like that. He thought it's not possible for space to have a curvature that changes. No way. But it does. And here with what they're doing, so Russell started working on writing up the principles of mathematics. He said, I'm going to do what Hilbert requested. I'm going to turn mathematics into like purely logical. I'm going to come up with some assumptions, some axioms, and I'm going to show how from them I can conclude, aspects of numbers. He worked on it very hard. He published partly on that in 1902, and then he wrote a 3-volume horrible thing from 1910 to 1913 called the Principia Mathematica, deliberately choosing the same title as Isaac Newton's Principia. And Russell was trying to carry this out, to make it all logical. What happened is that in 1931, Kurt Gödel proved formally what Sarah pointed out from the get-go. Kurt Gödel proved by going inside logic that there was no way to have a system that would be able to come to all true statements that could be expressed within it without some of those being missing or without having contradictions. This project is impossible, Gödel showed. So let me ask, here's an example. If I say this statement is false, am I saying something that's true or false? This statement is false. Oh, wait, but I said it was false.
True that it's false.
Well, if it's false, then I was lying when I said it was false.
Well, then you can't speak.
Right. This is a paradox. This is where, like, the conditions that you set up from the beginning, it doesn't work. It's impossible. Here's another one. This is another one, I think, from Bertrand Russell. There's a town where there is one barber, and every man either shaves himself or the barber shaves him. Who shaves the barber?
It's either the barber shaves him or well, it's got to be the barber because he's the only barber.
You'd think so, except the conditions were that every man shaves himself or the barber shaves him. So it's got to be one or the other.
Why can't he have a beard shave himself?
Why can't he have a beard? Yeah, that would be the way to resolve this. Just have a beard. There's a couple things that came in on the chat. Let me make sure I see what those are.
You said that was from Russell?
We cannot know. He used it. I'm not sure if he first invented that, but he used it. And so what Bertrand Russell did is he realized that it was very easy to make statements that were paradoxical. So he said, if we're going to be purely logical here, we need to have some way of avoiding these kinds of statements that blow up everything. So he said, okay, there are statements about things, there's statements about things, there's statements about statements about things. There's levels of these. And that way he could avoid what made both of those paradoxes work, which is that they referred to themselves. This statement is false. It's talking about itself. Russell says, nope, can't do that. You can have a statement about something in the world. You can have a statement about that statement, but you can't talk about yourself. With the barber is both a man living in the village, and he's the guy that this weird rule applies to. But that rule, right, it's self-referential to himself. And so Russell said, we have to avoid any potential for self-reflection. Certainly in logic and more generally, we have to prevent that from happening. So so he set out this whole lattice of thoughts based on that. Yes.
I think that, I don't know this, but I strongly believe that Kurt Gödel is the only person in the world who's ever read Principia Mathematica. I would challenge anyone to actually pick it up and attempt to read one paragraph. That is the document where they developed the so-called theory of types to do exactly what you just said, to avoid the set theoretic paradox that Russell laid out about being able to take unlimited sizes of sets. It was a set theoretic paradox. It's called Russell's paradox.
I just want to repeat part of that because I don't know how good the audio was. Rick said that Kurt Gödel may be the only person who ever actually read Newton's Principia Mathematica.
Or Russell.
Russell's Principia Mathematica. Let's see, a couple of things that came in here. Joe Jennings, I recall an episode of Star Trek where Captain Kirk fries the control system of the killer robots by saying, "I am lying." That sounds like it probably resulted in does not compute. All right, Dennis writes in, Cervantes has Sancho address the problem of a river with a bridge over it, with a sign that says, whoever says the truth can cross. Whoever lies gets hung on the tree by the side of the road. Sancho is faced with the conundrum of a guy who comes up to the bridge and says, I will be hung from the tree. If he tells the truth, you're supposed to pass. If you lie, you get hung on, right? So yeah, that's an example in Don Quixote. That's the exact same kind of paradox. So what Kurt Gödel did, in fact, actually, I don't need to, let's read what Kurt, let's let him speak to us. We've got, I think it's time for, I think an in-person reader. This is on page 3. Read what Gödel responds to all this. Here it is.
Yes.
Kurt Gödel on formally undecidable propositions, Principia Mathematica and Religious Systems, 1931. The development of mathematics in the direction of greater exactness has, as is well known, led to large tracts of it becoming formalized, so that proofs can be carried out according to a few mechanical rules. The most comprehensive formal systems yet set up are, on the one hand, the system of Principia Mathematica, and, on the other, the axiom system or set theory of Zermelo-Fraenkel, later extended by John von Neumann. These two systems are so extensive that all methods of proof used in mathematics today have been formalized in them, i.e., reduced to a few axioms and rules of inference. It may therefore be surmised that these axioms and rules of inference are also sufficient to decide all mathematical questions, which can in any way at all be expressed formally in the systems concerned. It is shown below that this is not the case, and that in both the systems mentioned, there are in fact relatively simple problems in the theory of ordinary whole numbers, which cannot be decided from the axioms. This situation is not due in some way to the special nature of the system set up, but holds for a very extensive class of formal systems, including, in particular, all those arising from the addition of a finite number of axioms to the two systems mentioned, provided that thereby no false propositions of the kind described in footnote 4 become provable. Before going into details, we shall first indicate the main lines of the proof, naturally without laying claim to exactness.
The type of microphone, please. The type of statement that Gödel is referring to, he said that already in these systems there are relatively simple problems in the theory of ordinary numbers which cannot be decided from the axioms. When he says simple problems, it's actually not quite that simple. What Gödel did was he figured out a way to turn logic itself into mathematics. I'm speaking a little bit loosely here. He made it possible to take a statement and turn it into a number, to encode it into itself being a number. He said a proof is a series of statements arriving at a conclusion. He was mathematically able to say that therefore a proof, he was able to go from a proof to its conclusion. All in numbers. And Gödel was able to say, without breaking Russell's rules of types that Rick had mentioned to avoid self-reference, Gödel was able to say, this statement cannot be proven. Let's think about that one. This doesn't say true or false. It says, this statement cannot be proven. What do you think about that? Is that a true statement, false statement, a paradoxical statement? This statement cannot be proven.
Same thing as saying, I don't know.
Well, I think it sure sounds like it. I think it's saying a little bit more than it, because it's saying not just that I don't know, but it can't be proven. Well, yeah, or at least it can't be known by a proof. Mm-hmm. And a proof, what did Hilbert say a proof was? A series of logical steps of finite length. So some from the chat, Isaiah says it's a limit, it's a boundary of where we can think. Morgan, a bit paradoxical because two things can be true at the same time. His rules could work, or things could be outside those. Nancy says, if it's unproven, then it's proven. And if it's proven, then it's unproven. Let's try out, let's see if Nancy's right here. So let's think this through. So the statement again, this statement cannot be proven. If we could prove that, then it wouldn't be right, because it would be false. Say, wait, this statement cannot be proven. That's what the statement says. So if we could prove that, nope. What if we can't prove it? This statement cannot be proven.
That can be proven to be proven.
Careful. This statement cannot be proven. Let's say you can't prove it. It wasn't a joke, it was a hypothesis, and it was a good one. There's a difference between something being true and something being provable. It's key here. So this statement cannot be proven. Let's say we can't prove it. Is it a true statement, a false statement, a paradoxical statement?
We don't know. Doesn't seem to be proof.
It would seem to be true.
True, that's the word, right. If we can't prove it, then it would be true.
True statement.
Right. So that it can't be proven doesn't cause a paradox. Statement doesn't say this statement is false. It says this statement cannot be proven. And maybe indeed that it can't be proven, but it's still true. So Gödel figured out a way to bypass Russell's protection system, get to the kernel, and make the paradox. He says something that is definitely true, that we can know to be true for meta-mathematical reasons outside the logical system, but which the system itself could never prove. And he says any logical system that's complex enough to do basic arithmetic will suffer this same shortcoming. There will definitely be truths that can be written using the language of that system, but which you could never prove from within that system. Michael says, Gödel hacked Russell. Kind of like that, yeah. So, does anyone have any other reflections about what this means? Hey, Rick.
And I was just going to comment that apparently Gödel was a devotee of Leibniz and Plato.
Yeah, it's true. He was a friend of Einstein's. They were at Princeton together when they left Europe. Yeah, Gödel was very reclusive there, and people attacked him a lot because what he had proved that a lot of these people had been completely wasting their time. But there was also something emotional to it. Like, what's the emotional sort of state of mind of somebody who is trying to say, I will find all the axioms, and if I do,
everything can just be logic. What kind of a mental outlook is that?
It's also fear-based, I would say.
Fear-based, how so?
Well, I see like what what's his name, Bertrand Russell was saying or whatever. I don't want to look, I don't want to have to be bothered with complexity that I don't want to be uncertain. I don't want to have ambiguity. Discovery makes me uncomfortable. So to me, it seems like a fear-based system.
I think that's true. Discovery definitely does make him uncomfortable because
It creates also uncertainty. That is sometimes fearful.
Yeah.
I don't know. As he said before, he wants to pull the veil down to know what the future, but this is kind of just a shortcut to knowledge.
Yeah. Let's see here. Hugh writes, sounds like fascism.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing is anti-human, right? It's anti-human because what we do, and just to put this in time context. So David Hilbert in 1900 says we got to turn math into logic. Math isn't strict and formal enough. We need to make it logic. 5 years later, 5 years later, what do we have? We've had Max Planck show that light energy is quantized, or at least that it's emitted in quantized pieces. We've had Einstein show that space and time are not absolute. They're related to each other, that every reference frame, in every frame of reference, light appears to have the same speed. What logic did Planck use to conclude that energy had to be quantized? Patricia, let's see here, Pat says, does Gödel say cannot be proven forever? I'm curious, could you say more about that? Either raise your hand or type more in the chat. Sounds intriguing.
I just thought also about the what you said, that it cannot be proven within the current system of logic. And I thought about how Mendeleev set up the periodic system of the elements, where he left open spaces because he knew there was something, but it was not yet there because it was not discovered. Is that something that?
I think that's in that kind of direction. I mean, so the fact is that what Max Planck discovered isn't logical. He didn't deduce it from axioms. It contradicted the axioms. Continuity was like an extremely basic principle of physics, of our understanding of the universe. Things happen, things always change smoothly. There's no jumps. Leibniz had this, the law of continuity. This is part of how he showed that Descartes was crazy with his physics. Planck now is saying, no. It's not continuous. It's discrete. So very illogical, contradictory, does not follow from the axioms. Rick or Lenore, would you like to speak up?
Yeah, this is an anecdote. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Turn off that.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
You can, okay. In Toronto, approximately 1973, the Communist Party was the intellectuals and mathematicians and others were having a meeting, and it was about the Soviet Union joining some outfit. I don't remember the name, but it was some ponderous scientific organization. And we went in there, I don't know, 3 or 4 of us, and we said, Kurt Gödel proved that all propositions eventually contradict themselves. So, and this is what you're dragging the Soviet Union into, and you shouldn't, and therefore this meeting shouldn't go on until you refute Kurt Gödel. So they shut down the meeting.
Okay. We've got also from the chat, Julian, Jason, do you have any explicit exact quotes from Russell showing how he wanted to exclude self-reference and stop human creativity. I will have to look that, nothing that comes immediately to mind, Julian, I'm sorry. I know I've read it somewhere, but I just can't place it now. Pat writes, is Gödel leaving open the idea of proof coming in the future? And Richard Freeman, go ahead.
Gödel does address that issue. This is Mike. He says that the point is things can be proven in the future, but nothing can be proven from an axiomatic system. You can add all the new axioms you want, but the system that he set up, the recursive number system that made it possible to have these sentences talk about themselves, would be true of any axiomatic system. So his point is that no axiomatic system could ever be complete, could ever prove everything. That you can always find this self-contradictory statement in his system that he set up, so that it can never be proven by any set of axioms.
Yes. Richard, you got your hand up?
Yes. I thought was it Sarah who said that these people are fearful? Was it Sarah? Yes. Just to take that one step further, it's the method of this whole thing. The system is set up so it cannot be self-referent. But the way creativity works is the mind is always self-referent, and it refers to its own concepts as it develops and self-perfects. If you look at when Lynn writes about agape, the idea that you could use the word and then you have to have a definition, but it could not refer back to itself, that's not the way Lynn develops it. He uses it maybe 15 to 20 times, bringing in higher and higher conceptions so that you actually start to get it. And all of language is self-referent. You can't take it away from the human being that's developing the language. So I think one additional premise is these people are completely afraid of their minds and rule out the mind. We're just going to set up a logical system, which will, as some people have said, will have no discovery and so forth. And I just want to mention, when I was in college and met many math students and physics students because of the courses I was taking, these people there's real anger and rage. I mean, if their system doesn't work and give them an answer, the personality type is a very, very angry person. So I just wanted to throw that in as well.
Yeah, that can definitely come with it. I think LaRouche had a joke about, what do you call a mathematician's party? A rage ball. We don't mean all mathematicians when we say this, of course. It's true. So yeah, look, another couple things about this, what Richard just brought up about self-reference, that's, I mean, imagine a person trying to avoid reflecting on that. Yeah, you end up, you really can't avoid it. Like, the self-reference is part of thinking. And the fact that somehow it can't be avoided within logic is really astonishing. The other thing is, so let's say that you realize, oh, here's some true statement that we couldn't prove from our axioms. But we have a new axiom. Now we can prove it. There's still always going to be something else that you can't. There's always going to be more, is what Gödel has shown. Let me ask this. In terms of how many principles, how many true statements there can be in that case, any finite number of axioms is never enough to include everything. Does that mean there's an infinite number of things to discover?
Yeah.
Because if we ever thought we were done, Gödel says, no, there's something true that you haven't gotten yet.
Just look at the universe from the new telescopes that are out there.
Find out what this universe is like. So let's talk about how AI people have dealt with this. Because you'd think that this makes it kind of obvious that you're never going to get AGI. The singularity is not coming. And so
how did people into that field deal with this? Well, one thing is they said, well, you know what? Maybe logic doesn't come up with everything, but that doesn't mean that human beings are any better than a logical system. Maybe we're fundamentally limited by logic too. So maybe what seems like the limit of a computer is actually a limit on human beings. Yeah, I don't think that's. Huh? Oh, okay.
I mean, how would that apply to human beings necessarily?
I regret to say that I was just checking the chat and forgot what I just said. So, could you remind me?
Talking about how do the AI folks deal with this limitation or the fact that you can have infinite amounts of axioms?
They deal with it. One of the big ways is by the idea of emergence. So the idea is that when you've got something simple that's occurring among pieces, eventually when you get enough of these pieces together, something new emerges, and it has its own laws and properties and principles. So they'll say, well, look at gas. If you've just got, one carbon dioxide molecule, it's a particle. If you have 3 of them, you got 3 particles. When you get enough of them, you got a gas. And you can talk about a gas in a way that you wouldn't talk about in terms of every individual particle. For example, what's the average, the temperature of a gas, its volume, things like this. It's like there's some new concept that it came from small pieces, but it has its own characteristics and properties. So they sort of take, at least I don't want to speak for them all, but it seems to me that they take almost as an article of faith that if you put enough computation together, something will emerge out of it. That human beings, there's not some fundamental difference between us and the animals. It's just as our brains got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then we hit critical velocity, and it was takeoff. So that's how they try to deal with this.
Just that reminds of LaRouche's consistent attacks on angles. That LaRouche attacked angles for the assertion that repeated use of an opposable thumb by monkeys is what eventually became human beings. And it's the same kind of mystical emergence from as far as I can tell.
English angles, yeah.
Thank
you.
Yes. I think people
didn't hate geometry.
They're trying to be so logical, but they have these completely mystical ideas of how things develop.
Take the mic back.
You do. You're being logical, but then you have to, there's this article of faith. And this is everywhere. Like if you, I know it's very popular to hate on this guy, but I promise I was doing it early on. That guy, Yuval, Harari, that Harari fella, unbearable kind of guy. And, his book is that there is no free will, the brain determined what our mind thought. But it's really not conclusive. These people want to believe it. Somehow the mind must be biology. Somehow biology must be chemistry. We don't know how yet. Somehow chemistry must just be physics. We don't know how yet exactly. But there isn't fundamentally anything higher or new. There is no specific domain of life, principles of life. There is no such thing as cognition, except as an epiphenomenon of particles. They say it, they might want to think it, but unless you can actually do it, you don't know it. I mean, if they actually made a brilliant genius AI thing, then they could say, look, see, we did it, but you can't say that. It hasn't happened. A couple things from the chat. Let's see here. Richard says the AGI, artificial general intelligence, advocates seek to prove that humans are limited by pitting them against computers in solving predefined problems. If the computer gets the right answer more often, it must be smarter than the human. Therefore, all humans must submit to the computer, except, of course, the owner of the software company, and bow down and bend over. Woo!
AI can never know or understand experiential learning. Brandon says AGI is irrelevant. And then someone with the name ICLC has their hand raised. Would you like to speak?
Hi, it's Nancy. Can you hear me?
Hi, Nancy. Go ahead.
Hi. So I have a question about this emergence theory because Lynn used to make references to the idea of developing analog computers as opposed to digital. And I'm thinking that the emergence theory seems to me very digital because it's just an expansion of dots or facts or whatever. Do you know what he meant about analog computers, or is that related to this issue of the emergence?
I'm not sure how it relates to emergence per se, because even, I mean, an analog computer is still a physical mechanical system, electrical, physical, depends on how you make it, water. You want to go that route. So I don't think it really gets at emergence.
Well, a sine wave is an analog of some actual motion, right? Continuous process.
Yeah, I was debating whether to get into what an analog computer is or not, because it's not really that. An analog computation involves not breaking things up into a numerical expression. That's what digital does. You're dealing with two numbers, you have to figure out some way of writing them out as digits and then operating on those digits. That's digital. An analog computer could take in quantities as themselves, say a flow of water, speed of something moving, the charge, you know, on some capacitor, and through a series of physical steps, allow those quantities considered as continuous quantities to act on each other. So I think, okay, let's keep going. Anyway, that's what
transistor radio.
A transistor radio
is an analog computer, right?
Yeah, a transistor, right? It is basically it's a multiplier. You take some signal and you multiply it, and it's not done digitally. It's just based on the amount of charge, and it causes something physical. So that's an example of an analog computer. Okay, now, so we talked about that, about ChatGPT. Let me actually ask us to take a look at what some computer nerds think about this. And this was, I think it's time for an online reader, especially if you've never read before in this class series, you get first dibs. Here's your chance. We're going to read the very last statement from Apple Computer. Let's pull that up. There it is. Okay, so Karen Nafziger is unmuted. Okay.
Yes, I'll read it.
Okay.
Okay. Researchers at Apple, The Illusion of Thinking, from 2025. In this paper, we systematically examine frontier large reasoning models, LRMs, through the lens of problem complexity using controllable puzzle environments. Our findings reveal fundamental limitations in current models. Despite sophisticated self-reflection mechanisms, these models fail to develop generalizable reasoning capabilities beyond certain complexity thresholds. We identified 3 distinct reasoning regimes. Standard LLMs outperform LRMs at low complexity. And what's an LLM, Jason?
A large language model.
Mm-hmm. Large language model.
Could you check if people are muted, except for?
Somebody's not muted.
It's Karen. It's a clock in her house.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, so we identified 3 distinct reasoning regimes. Standard LLMs outperform LRMs at low complexity. LRMs excel at moderate complexity, and both collapse at high complexity. Particularly concerning is the counterintuitive reduction in reasoning effort as problems approach critical complexity. suggesting an inherent compute scaling limit in LRMs. Our detailed analysis of reasoning traces further exposed complexity-dependent reasoning patterns from inefficient overthinking on simpler problems to complete failure on complex ones. These insights challenge prevailing assumptions about LRM capabilities and suggest that current approaches may be encountering fundamental barriers to generalizable reasoning. Finally, we presented some surprising results on LRMs that lead to several open questions for future work. Most notably, we observed their limitations in performing exact computation. For example, when we provided the solution algorithm for the Tower of Hanoi to the models, their performance on this puzzle did not improve. We believe our results can pave the way for future investigations into the reasoning capabilities of these systems.
So in terms of that LRM, LLM thing, so large language model, that's ChatGPT, Grok, as it was, I don't know, maybe a year ago. Large reasoning models try to be self-reflexive. Like if you ever ask it something, it says, I'm thinking about that. I mean, so it's like talking to itself for a while. That's what they're referring to there. And they found that for relatively simple problems, these systems just could not solve them. And they found oddly that at above a certain complexity, the large reasoning models would actually start processing less. Like they basically gave up, something like that, and then just gave an answer or a wrong answer or said they didn't know. Amazing here was on the issue of actual knowledge. So it said, for example, when we provided the solution algorithm to the Tower of Hanoi to the models, their performance on this puzzle did not improve. Tower of Hanoi is you've got a few pegs, and on it, one of them, you've got a stack of discs, decreasing size, like like that thing kids play with. The goal is to move that whole stack to another peg, but the rule is you can only place a smaller one on top of a larger one. So it's kind of complex to move them around, and that they would increase the number of pegs and the number of discs, and they had a harder and harder time with it. But when they told their chat companion, here is how you solve it. This isn't like every first year computing class you learn this, like the way to always solve it. They gave it that, and it still didn't help. Like it gave the thought that you would use to get the answer, and it just
couldn't compute.
Nothing does not compute yet.
Never that.
Doesn't make sense for
Hey, that's from some people might say that sour grapes because Apple has been so far behind in AI, but I didn't need to add that. Okay, so a couple more things to bring up. One is about the ChatGPT issue. I posed in the email, is ChatGPT right? And how do you know? So of course, you only know if ChatGPT is right if you actually know whether it's right. You have to know the material yourself, otherwise you don't know. I mean, you might have some idea of what makes it often more likely to be wrong, but you don't actually know anything unless you know something. Shocking, right? So we can't outsource knowledge. These systems may be very useful for certain purposes, but they don't replace human thinking because they're logical. We got that from Gödel. And also in terms of how we interact with them socially, we got to be careful that they don't tempt us into losing the ability to actually know things ourselves. That would be pretty terrible. If everyone grew up not actually knowing anything, where would society be? And then I think you also see this partly in the, there's definitely a bubble, an AI bubble, in terms of companies that are getting huge market caps and aren't actually making any money. And it's all kind of in the expectation or the hope that the breakthrough will happen, and then, it'll be amazing. A different approach would be maybe more like what China has taken, which is applications. So robotics, logistics, obviously we do that here too, but if you look at the level of automation
robotic automation in China, that uses what's called AI, these machine learning, and it's economically useful. A lot of the stuff isn't necessarily economically useful. It's fun making funny pictures for your friends and so forth, but doesn't mean it's making the society more productive. Kind of like the dot-com era. These companies made money, but they didn't necessarily cause much of a change in the physical productivity of the economy. Not as much as earlier developments that were actually productive.
Jason,
Yes.
do you have any resources on that you can recommend, like how the Chinese actually applying it to physical economic processes like robotics or factory lines versus how we normally use AI?
I guess I could cite my Twitter feed. I don't know what comes across them. I'm always seeing these wonderful things, from China. I know I don't have a source in particular.
Actually, of course, Harry and I, and others who were here, we went to China, and we visited the headquarters of Baidu. And Baidu is a big search engine company, but they also have a big AI operation, including we rode in their driverless cars. And one of the main things that came forward and what they're planning to do with AI is agriculture.
Yeah.
And you can imagine how useful it would be in terms of making rapid determinations about exactly what should be provided to different crops in different areas, down to the square meter or something like that.
Actual nation.
They also do that in the US with satellite.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because there's no doubt about it. Machine learning definitely is a new era in terms of automation. You don't have to come up with the whole model yourself as the programmer and tell it how to act in every single instance. It kind of figures things out on its own a bit. And that's helpful and that's useful. Question came in from the chat, Brandon. Well, what is economically useful? Okay, good point. Morgan wrote that economically useful would mean economic relations that actually produce commodities useful for humans.
May I clarify my question, please?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, the reason I'm asking the question is because, for every machine that increases productivity, we essentially are removing someone from the economic cycle. And so it's almost like shooting ourselves in the foot. And it's something that I've been trying to understand for a long time. I mean, I have some they're really aligned with Ray Kurzweil beliefs about the merging of the machines and humans rather than the enemy of the machines and humans, enemy of each other. And so, there's this kind of belief that's as hopeful and as pie in the sky as machines are going to save us from everything, but that's also that humans will find new ways to be productive because our entire psyche is built off of the good feeling of being productive. Whereas I personally believe that humans are going to reduce, not in a bad way, but they're going to become Hindu cows, because now the creative intellect is still important because we haven't proven that machines have a creative intellect because they don't have a will to live. But if you were to give a machine like, hey, you need electricity, well, that's your food, well, that gives them a small will to live. So I'm just kind of rambling. This is my first time in this conversation. I've been following LaRouche for a long time. But yeah, I want to understand what we define as, the question that I asked, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thanks for chiming in and raising that directly. Oops. I'm sorry, I just completely lost my thought of how to respond to you.
Well, it's like the debate about automation.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Thank you. I'm sorry about that, Brandon. So when you automate a job, do you take somebody away from that job who used to be doing it themselves? Yeah.
Right.
On the other hand, if you look at what tasks need doing today, if we had no robots in the assembly lines, if we had people wielding, pickaxes to do all of the mining, and wheelbarrows, our level of productivity, our level of life would be dramatically reduced. There would just be much less available to every person.
There is also the people which are making the robot.
Yeah, I mean,
machine
sure,
and
people,
whatever.
there are people who have the jobs making the robots. And that's the thing is, what kind of jobs do we have today, or maybe let's say in the 60s, that couldn't have existed except for the level of labor savings from these technologies that replaced human labor with energetic labor in some way.
Yeah, I also have a question. Didn't LaRouche himself emphasize the importance of capital intensive labor versus labor intensive?
Yeah, yeah.
Concept.
Economic growth comes with an increase in capital intensity. You can increase the labor intensity only, but so much. I mean, you can't work but so many hours a day, but if you have better equipment, better tools, or just a different occupation for yourself altogether, you can be more and more productive. So I know that when we apply this to today, it seems perhaps a little scarier than in the past when people thought, cars would put out of employment all the stable owners and horse feeders or whatever. It's true that wasn't a very common job afterwards, but people found other things to do. If robots are doing everything, what's for people to do? I get where, it seems a little different today.
So it just brings back to the question of economically useful, right? We still haven't answered. I mean, I guess what you're talking about is what LaRouche talks about initially, and so you wish to learn about economics, right? It's the flux density, right? It's the, making a knife so that you can, or an axe so you can cut more wood, right? And all that's true, right? But these are very like isolated things, and this AI LLM thing is encompassing all. And so, what Kurzweil would say is that like the only way to do that is to merge and to have universal basic income, because like the machines win, right? They're more productive, and then we're kind of steering the ship as the final point of approval, the manager, the CEO, right, signing off on it. But eventually they're going to be doing so much beyond what we can possibly comprehend. We just have to trust them, and then we kind of have to merge with them, which is the idea of the singularity, which is why I say that like this AGI, whether it's achieved or not, is not relevant, because we're already seeing like Neuroflash, right? There's a guy on the internet now that is playing a video game all day long on Twitch with his brain and not his hands, and using that. So those machines like are there, right? And so, we have the guiding creative force, but most of the machines are doing the work. And so what's scary is that it's a violation of what LaRouche talked about himself initially, which is like, increasing the population density. But because all the population doesn't have jobs, like there's going to be unrest, because the human evolutionary capacity says, when I do work, that releases dopamine, that releases serotonin, that releases oxytocin. That is what makes me feel good. So if I'm just sitting around doing nothing, that's like a fundamental paradigm shift of what I do in my leisure time and how fulfilling that is to, exist in Maslow's hierarchy. So I'll stop there.
Well, good points. I mean, one thing is about how one spends one's leisure time, because often today it's not very productive.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're, binge watching something on Netflix or whatnot, I doubt that when you're done, you say, that really made me a much better person. And I am so glad I didn't spend those 20 hours taking singing lessons, making friends, working on my side project about understanding electricity better. You don't say that, right? So that's one thing, is what's done with leisure, or what is culture? And that's the other side of this whole equation. We've had logic sort of take over in the sciences, and then what has happened in culture? Does it treat people like animals, to be entertained or addicted or something, wanting to keep that high and scroll forever?
Words like numbers.
So then the other thing I wanted to add was about economic productivity. So I love what Neuralink has done. The application of being able to play video games all day is definitely an example of not being economically useful. But of course, people with physical ailments able to control things, that's wonderful, of course. Yeah. One way you could measure it is LaRouche likes to use the metric of potential relative population density. So animals have a carrying capacity for a certain territory, certain environment. We don't have a fixed carrying capacity. It depends on what we know, what technologies we have, how we've improved, transformed the environment around us into a more nurturing synthetic environment. So fundamentally, that comes from being productive and having technology, sure. But most fundamentally, it comes from making breakthroughs in science. So how are we going to get that ars inveniendi that we need? Break out of this logic and then come to how do we get new hypotheses? Well, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also, you can look at it as, I think you can draw a pretty clean line between talking about automation. Automation is basically everything that's not intelligence, because if you think about what can be automated, like certain types of manual labor or like filling out spreadsheets. I mean, ChatGPT is great for like formatting data. You find some data somewhere, you want to format it in a certain way to plug into some other program. That's all automatable because it doesn't require actual intelligence. So what that tells me is that, you know, what AI is gonna, the types of labor, of so-called labor that AI is gonna replace are the types of labor that don't require like human cognition. And so that has a lot of potential there and a lot of opportunity for humans to do more human things. So I don't really think that's necessarily a bad thing, although it's obviously, as I think the person said, it's going to be a very challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I got a few things from
If
the
you
chat.
if you just think about the idea that as a movement, we've been campaigning around the idea of great missions for mankind, right? Whether it's the infrastructure projects or the space program, every one of these things would involve potentially billions of people who otherwise they don't have access to all the fancy stuff that you might have by being an internet nerd, right? They actually have to make these discoveries independently, right? In the process, but there's a mission, there's an idea of where we're going to go, which is not something that you can reprogram, I don't think, anyway, right? Just thinking about that, I was going to make an analogy too. There was a guy who was kind of famous in the 60s named Richard Brodigan.
Yeah.
And he had this poem about how we're going to be all watched over by machines of loving grace.
Oh, my.
And we ended up committing suicide, so you can get what he was like popular amongst the hippies back then. But anyway, the idea is having a mission, the future that encompasses the needs of humanity, that transcends any idea that somehow you're going to get put out of business by, automatic.
Yeah, because we're nowhere near being done.
Yeah.
Culturally, we're nowhere near where we could be. We don't have nearly as much beauty as we should. Not even close. We had so much ugliness, so that we have a huge work to do on that.
You've actually started yourself.
Yeah, economically, the world is in dire need of economic development. And then, disease, the frontiers of curing disease, the frontiers of being able to redirect a comet that's going to kill us all and being able to actually do something about it. So we're not really on the edge of being done with everything, that's for sure. Let me read a few things from the chat, and then I see Dennis has his hand up. So from the chat, we got Nancy says that LaRouche had said that if society evolved to the point where human labor becomes essentially engineering, that wouldn't be bad. Brandon says the video game player is not economically useful. Yeah, I didn't think you were saying that was. I was just commenting on it. Richard Burton says, the science is settled means I forbid you to practice science. Submit to my AI expert system. Okay. Neuralink is definitely, no, it's wonderful. AI is getting better at diagnosing cancer from an X-ray than any doctor on the planet. It's true. If you're a radiologist, go. People are opting out of. Okay, so that's from the chat. Dennis, you got your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just wanted to do an illustration. I put this in a couple of days ago, but people may not have had any reason to have read this. But I had the occasion because I was writing the briefing. I wanted to check something, and I decided I would ask AI a few questions. Particular question: did Vladimir Putin propose that it was possible that Russia would join NATO? The answer was no. Vladimir Putin never proposed that it was possible for Russia to join NATO.
What? He did. He did in the 90s.
So here's what the facts are. November 4th, 2021, there's an article, London Guardian. Ex-NATO head says Putin wanted to join alliance early on in his rule. Then George Robertson, a former Labor Defense Secretary who led NATO between 1999 and 2003, said Putin made it clear at their first meeting that he wanted Russia to be part of Western Europe. Then he quotes, it says, Putin said, "When are you going to invite us to join NATO?" Robertson said, "Well, we don't invite people to join NATO. They apply to join NATO." And Putin said, "Well, we're not standing in line with a lot of countries that don't matter." Then separately from that, Vladimir Putin spoke to David Frost, who was a late night host who became famous for his having interviewed Richard Nixon. And this is in 2000, before Putin was inaugurated. He was not inaugurated until I think it was May of 2000. So it says, Putin told Frost he would not rule out joining NATO, quote, if and when Russia's views are taken into account as those of an equal partner. Now, the reason I was looking it up was because there were National Archive documents that were just released 3 to 4 days ago, in which the assertion was made that Bill Clinton had proposed to Putin that Russia join NATO. Though, in fact, in looking at what they said, it was clear that Clinton had not exactly said that. What he had said was that there's a difficulty in the idea of Russia joining NATO right now, but ultimately that may be able to be solved. The reason that it was important to look it up was because we were about to publish something which was an indicator that the National Security Archives documents were correct in that implication, and that implication was wrong. Now, not the fact merely, because you couldn't tell what the fact was. You could neither prove nor disprove that Bill Clinton had initiated the discussion in the first place. Actually, what had happened was that in 1999, the Czech Republic, Poland, and one other country had just joined NATO. And it was the Clinton administration that began the expansion of NATO from the standpoint of the actual concrete expansion. So it was the opposite of asking Russia to join. In fact, they were doing the opposite. So my point here is, you said earlier, Jason, if you don't already know, then the problem is that if you ask and you don't know, the answers that you will get will be lies from your AI system. Okay, so I just wanted to give that as an illustration because that happened to us this week. And if we were to rely on anything like that, we could not do intelligence. Information is not power, intelligence is power.
Yeah. I mean, it can lie to you. It doesn't, obviously you weren't saying this, but it doesn't always get everything wrong. But
right.
You've definitely given an example of it getting something wrong, which I think everybody who's used these has encountered. Okay. So let's, Richard, I'm going to come back to you. I want to add just a few more things in the hopper here. And then somebody points out, hey, same for any page on the internet. It's true. You could read a web page. People are definitely capable of saying things that are wrong as well, which is why you the fact you can't rely on authority isn't really something new with ChatGPT. It's already the case. You can't just accept what anybody has to say. Are you okay? Briefly, please. And then, yeah.
It's just, I just think it seems like really crazy, but it reminds me of John Basar, who was a farmer, remember a long time ago. And when he used to talk about manual tasks on the farm and being a kid on the farm, 7, 8 years, 9, 10 years old, was the key to it was not the manual task, but the idea of figuring out how to do it better. And that's where he would look at what he was doing, even as a kid, and figure out a better way to do it. And you realize why American agriculture resulted in these very smart farmers. And it seems to me it's a similar thing on this question of computer and programming and so forth. It can do things fine, but the human element is, can you do it? You look at it and you say, well, really, it would be better if we could do it this way. And I'm thinking about the petitioning and what you guys did, Jason and Adrian, and saying, well, we have this program, but we need to know this. And then you would figure out how to do it, how we could do it better. And that's a whole different thing. Now, we were at an event yesterday, and some of the people who spoke about Palantir, and they were it was a pretty devastating picture about their role. And one thing they did mention is that some new area they're trying to research is the anticipation of what should be done, what could be done in a different way. But I'm just saying that because it just seems to be, a certain element.
Okay, let me add just a couple other things here. So just return to emergence. I want to bring up the work of Pasteur and Vladimir Vernadsky for a moment. So Louis Pasteur had noted something fundamentally different between non-living and living processes. Non-living processes, so some molecules exist in a way that you can put the atoms together and get two different versions of it that are the same, except being mirror images, like your two hands. Abiotic processes would just output the same amount of both. They didn't care. But in life, this and this are very different. It's chirality is the Latin-based word for it, meaning spiral. And so Pasteur wondered what's different about where life happens. Vladimir Vernadsky, who was a Russian, Ukrainianish scientist from the 20th century, he wanted to figure out how to solve this problem. What is the shape of space where in biology the hand matters? And so he was talking to mathematicians and he's saying, can anybody help me with this? And they all said, no, space just doesn't have that kind of, you can't have a space that has that chirality to it. We don't know of any way that can happen. Another example from Vernadsky. So in terms of, is the biology fully explainable from the chemistry? Not sure. Vernadsky pointed out that there's different types of time, fundamentally different idea of time for life, for cognition, than for non-life. For non-living things, if you look atom by atom, you could reverse any physical process and it wouldn't violate any physical laws. If these two atoms bounce off each other like that, if you reversed it, they'd bounce back and do what they had initially done, except for quantum stuff. So there is this sort of reversibility of time, but in life, there's an arrow of time. During the life of an organism, over evolutionary time, there's a different kind of step forward. Over generational time, it's different. Plants can't walk, but over generational time, trees are effectively marching. They're moving over generational time. And then what does time mean for us? I mean, what do we have in the moment that animals I don't think have? I mean, we've got free will, right? So there's a very fundamentally different kind of time. A rock, a baseball, you hit a baseball with a baseball bat. The baseball doesn't get to do any thinking about what's going to happen. It's just what's going to happen is going to happen. Animals are ruled by instincts. Ants aren't thinking. They're just doing what ants do. But, for us, there's actually a very different kind of time.
So LaRouche said you really should distinguish between the abiotic world, the living world, cognitive world, and consider that there are principles that exist in one domain that just don't exist in the other, or at least not in the same way. Yes.
Is it generally accepted that this chirality is the fundamental distinguishing factor between non-life and life? Is that generally accepted?
Yeah, it was the basis of the was it Voyager, or no, it was what's the one that went to I'm embarrassed I forget, but one of these NASA missions to go look for life on the planet. Part of the equipment that it had was to look for
Somebody's not muted or something.
Denise Ham, mute. There she did.
Okay. Anyway, so yeah, they said that, you know, they thought this would be a really good indicator. Because how do you find out if there's life on another planet? Or used to be? You know, you can look for some molecules that you say it's very unlikely this would have existed at all without life. And then specifically, if you get a predominance of just one of the higher versions of it, that would look like a really strong support for it. So, but yeah, it's still an important thing. I want to take a moment now to take a look at what is occurring when a machine is learning. And so we can compare this process to what we do when we're making discoveries. See what's similar and what's different. So, here we go. All right, let's reset everything. Well, let's completely reset. Okay. So what we're seeing here is on the right, we've got, this is our data. We got some orange things out here. We've got some blue things out here. And our computer is going to try and learn how to figure out, based on the location, is it likely to be blue or orange? So let's just kind of watch this happen. Oh, that was pretty quick. So pretty quickly, here, let's actually do it real slow. So you can see step by step, what it's doing is it's adjusting itself until it's able to get the error between what it was supposed to get and what it does have. It's trying to get it down as far as it can. The way it's doing that is this is a neural network. It's called that because it's based on human, you know, the nervous system, neurons. We have neurons in our brains. They receive input from other neurons that fire things at them. And then they themselves can fire with varying intensities to other neurons. So you hear from some, you speak to others. So people said, well, you know, let's kind of make that ourselves. Let's have a bunch of neurons. And what we'll do is every step of the way, here, maybe, no, it'll be easier to view. Sorry, guys.
Yes.
So take a look at, pick one of these on the right and watch what happens as I go forward step by step. Right, so something's happening where it's learning based on trying to get the right answer. Here we go. Now let's take a look at this complicated one. Let it run. It's trying to figure it out. And that's just about as far as it gets. Oh, oh, oh. I spoke too soon. All right, let's see what else it comes up with. Okay, so you know,
What's it trying to do? I don't get it.
It's trying to find the orange areas versus the blue.
so the background on this image, on this square, the orange and the blue, this is the output from the model. The dots are the data. So it's trying to make a model that fits the data well. It's trying to make sure the blue areas correspond to blue dots and the orange area to orange dots. Now this one, it's sort of, that's about as far as it's getting.
Should be too
People
stupid.
noticed, hey, if you just start adding more and more neurons all over the place, then you know, you can get better results. So that looks a lot better. It looks closer. It doesn't mean that that's what's making it, because we know what made these dots, right? It's a spiral. It's like one thought. Is how they made it for this page.
Too stupid.
Okay. So in a big large language model that you use, you're using ChatGPT, we saw those neurons, they each had little, there were settings for each of the neurons. Let me talk about what a parameter is. So each of these lines here is a parameter. It's telling you from this neuron to this neuron, the blue line says, okay, if this one fires, it'll have a positive impact on this one. An orange line means that if this one fires, we follow the line, it'll have a negative impact on this one. And the lines are different thicknesses. So each line is like, the thickness of each line is like a little dial that the thing is adjusting. And adjust all these little dials till it comes up with what you want. Does anyone who doesn't already know want to make a guess as to how many dials there are on ChatGPT? How many parameters?
It's like over 1 billion. Like it's a lot. I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot, right? I mean,
it is.
It's at least hundreds of millions. It might be in the billions.
It is in the billions. I think it has actually reached 1 trillion now at this point with the latest model. So there's 1 trillion little dials, you know, all set up so that when you put in some text, it, you know, goes through this contraption and out pops something that's hopefully useful sometimes. Although, as Dennis pointed out, could also be misleading and wrong. So how does that process compare to the way that we think?
Well, this is just matching, right? It's just matching.
It is.
So we have greater capacity for discernment and nuance.
We do. We do. Also, what does, I mean, when you think of, when you have a new idea, you know, the last time, think of your last, like your aha type moment. Did that feel like you had just spent hours adjusting trillions of knobs, or did it feel like one thing?
Yeah, like a singular thing.
That's how it feels, right? That's how we experience it. It's one idea, one new thought. So compare, I mean, just how different are these two things? You get all these trillions of dials. It's like the astronomers before Kepler, or, you know, Adrian showed that if you keep adding more dials, you can get closer and closer to matching where you see the planet. And Kepler said, no, there's two physical causes here. There's a reason for it. It was a simple cause, not a bunch of dials.
What? Sorry, can I?
Of course.
Well, then I guess I just think about the nature of the human mind, right? Is the process that allows you to know something knowable and reproducible? I mean, obviously, if you have a child, yeah, you reproduce the ability to think or create it in somebody else, but like, is there no way in which you can map out how the human mind processes and creates and thinks and discovers? And then why couldn't you be able to reproduce that in some way that doesn't involve making another human being? I'm asking, I wasn't just trying to make a profound statement.
It just happens so naturally with you, you know. Good curse. You don't have any thoughts on that? What does it mean to reproduce a human being? Well, I mean, it's not the time for the birds and the bees. But you know, like a baby's born, how do you create a creative human adult? You know, but
can you repeat your question?
Repeat my question.
Reproduce it.
How do you? If okay, so like for example, you just talked, Sarah. You just talked about
we have a greater capacity for nuance and understanding. And Jason then broke that down and said, right, when you think of a new idea or a problem or an answer to a problem, it's just a one. You didn't have to like redial a trillion knobs in your mind, right? But can we know the process that makes the human mind function the way it does? And can that then be reproduced artificially, not just because if you have a child, of course, you know, then that's like, yeah, you're reproducing this ability to create another mind. But like, what makes the mind, and how can you like make it a schematic? Like, here's how the human mind works, here's a blueprint for it, and now we can reproduce it.
So your question is that the method of discovery is reproduced outside the human mind.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because there's,
You make a machine that would do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
can you make something or a machine that could do that could make an actual discovery?
That would be creative.
Daniel, can I say something?
This returns to the beginning of the class with Gödel. Because the question is, I mean, it seems to me that it's rather self-referential in the sense that the idea of a machine is that it's automated, and that it has certain axiomatic basis upon which it functions. Because that's what we mean by automated. But we proved earlier in the class that it's impossible to encompass things that would be proven true in the future in a completed axiomatic system.
Right, but that's why I'm asking, like, can we know how the human mind actually works? Can that be known?
Dear God.
Well,
that doesn't, I mean, it would assume that the human mind is a self-contained like machine, basically.
Yeah, because also there is difference between human mind and not all. There is some kids which are able to go to college at an age like 7 or 11, and how they learn as fast.
Let's make it a little more specific, Jose. What you're saying is like, can we understand how the mind works? Is that?
That's the first part of it.
So there's a difference between, can we know everything about how the mind works, and can we know some things about how the mind works?
we know you can influence how somebody thinks. You can, I mean, that's why, like, philosophy, for example, you can force somebody to think in terms of logic only and reasoning. You can brainwash somebody into thinking to think only logistically, as we've seen with people like Bertrand Russell, which you were going through earlier in the class, right? And he says this is the only way to think. And we see that problem today with modern science, where they say you can't actually go after a contradiction, that science has to make sense, right? And instead of breaking their own axioms, they just further on evidence or proof to make their axioms work. But what was I saying? Yeah, right. But like the actual, so we know you can influence how somebody thinks, but like, what is the nature of creativity?
Yeah, that's you brought up, can you brainwash someone into thinking logically? And, horrible things happened to Bertrand Russell as a child that I think played a role in his later adult activities. The other question is, can you brainwash someone into being creative? Or
that's what we exist. That's what this organization's for.
Hey, that's right. Wait a minute, brainwash, but educate is the word.
We're going to make every child a genius, no matter what.
I like it. Can this be taught? Is it possible to create an environment that improves the ability of someone's mind to come up with new thoughts? Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So what kind of things should we include in that? How do we make sure that the next generation, we get some real geniuses, we get some great new music and great new scientific discoveries? What should we do in that education?
Fresh food, housing, healthcare.
Sure, absolutely. Physical necessities, make sure you develop healthily. Absolutely. Miss Rachel,
The lady who does the YouTube.
make sure to show the kids Miss Rachel. But over the years, right?
Rachel Ray.
That's not gonna work when you're 15, right?
But yeah, you teach them how to play the piano, how to play instruments, how to understand music. Maybe you teach them a new language or two new languages.
Yeah, other languages help you kind of have a different way of thinking. It's incredibly helpful. And then what if during education, all these years that are spent or misspent on, preparing for tests and cramming and memorizing things that you're going to forget or hope you can forget as soon as the semester is over. What if during that time we went through the kinds of things that we've done through this class series? I mean, shouldn't we all have read Plato in school and enjoyed that? Should we all have known what Kepler did? Shouldn't we have all read Fermat? Shouldn't we all have known what Leibniz did? So, there's such enormous potential to grow in this way that in terms of what makes how does the mind work? I think we have some ideas about how to make it work better. If we don't know everything about the mind and won't ever.
But can't we take like Humboldt and some of those better skilled ideas to make a person able to think for themselves? I mean, if he has books, I mean, it's not like we have to recreate it completely, but there was in time in history, very excellent teachers of knowledge of that.
Let me read a few things that came in from the chat. Make sure our online people get a chance. See, the mind is not the brain, says Susan. Soul is not the brain either. You can X-ray your brain, but not your mind.
That's
question. Let's see here. You have to recognize love. No machine can form a hypothesis. Morgan, does creativity come from us though? I'm not all that creative, but I stumble upon a lot. Well, does it come from us? That's a really interesting way of putting it. I mean, what did Plato have Socrates say? That the ideas are already in you, and then you unearth and provoke them into coming out.
Like the slave boy?
Yeah, exactly. Like the slave boy in the Meno. He hadn't studied geometry, but the ability to recognize truth was in his mind. Michael says, human intelligence works on two levels, brain and the mind. They are mimicking the brain, but does the software algorithm make a match for the human mind? Discovers the discipline. Yeah, Brandon, right. Yeah, that if you recreate the discoveries in a field, you'll be in a much better position to make the next one. And the point of education isn't to know what we already know. I mean, that's important, but where's the new knowledge going to come from? So if you don't study that at all, you're not going to be very good at it. Isaiah says, imagine if there was a school like that. Well, hey, we can do more than imagine. Let's make it happen. And yeah, he promotes the idea of euthenics, which is not someone from Madrid saying eugenics, but euthenics is the science of improving the well-being of humankind through bettering living conditions, contrary to eugenics.
I know that, I'm sorry, did you want to, well, it's just that like it was 57 where Chomsky had a paper on linguistics. He was reviewing a guy named Skinner's work on linguistics. And I think it was Skinner who was arguing that if animals could just be trained to use language, they could be as advanced as human beings. And Chomsky actually argued, no, that language itself is intrinsic to human beings. And this was a big fight in the 50s and 60s as to whether or not language is uniquely human or something that animals have their own way of communicating in the way that humans do, just differently. And so Chomsky had actually proved no, that language and complex language is innate to human beings only. And so I just going back to this idea of whether or not we can actually know how the human mind works, we do know that human beings are actually unique from animals, and that we shouldn't try to approach it like you can teach a dog how to spin around if he wants a treat, but you know, you can't do that with, I mean, I guess you could do it with a baby, but like you wouldn't have to.
So, way to create a new Bertrand Russell.
We raised a child with dogs to see if it became a dog. Bring up another person.
1 second, that it's also that children, they are born with a natural kind of instinct to learn and ask questions and stuff. And it would just be like, kind of would also almost be enough to not kind of stop them from asking, I think, because a lot of education system is just based on the idea that they should shut up and better regurge what they are told by the teacher. That is not education. Just let them do whatever they want to figure out. Just make sure they don't die.
So you brought up Chomsky. I forgot to say something about Norbert Wiener. So Norbert Wiener wrote cybernetics. He was a pioneer or proponent, let's say, of information theory. And Lyndon LaRouche was angry about this idea from Norbert Wiener, that it helped provoke him into having his own insights into economics and to being somebody who wanted to act in changing the world. He thought that, actually, I'm just going to leave that there. So that's another reference that ought to exist is Wiener. Look, I want to do a few things to move towards wrapping up, given the time. So let me pose a few other things for reflection. Other examples of whether emergence is something that's real. Music. Do the notes make the music? The particles become a gas. Does putting notes together become music?
And the notes just a reflection of the music?
Yeah, it's the other way around, right? The music is first, and then you have to use notes to write it down and express it so someone else can sing your song or whatever, right? Poetry. The meaning in a poem, it's not really literal. I mean, it could be depending on the poem, but if you could have just written an essay, then why'd you write a poem? What are you saying differently with your use of language in that way? And I was thinking about like actors who sound like actors instead of their character. Like, have you ever seen like a not very good Shakespeare production? Yes. Including if someone, and people may have spent millions of dollars making it, and it may still have been a terrible one. People, they don't sound like characters in a real drama. Sometimes they sound like actors. Or if you look up Shakespeare sonnets on YouTube to hear different people reciting them, you get the people that think of themselves as such thespians that they're thundering in a British accent and enunciating and, you know, I all alone beweep my outcast state and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries and look upon myself and curse my fate. And they're into how they sound. And it's like, okay, I don't think what Shakespeare said is really coming across with all of that, you know, bellowing. Thank you.
Romeo.
There you go. So, or like a little bit further field, but like operas, opera staging. It's like they feel like they have to do something weird. They're like, okay, this opera's been done 100 times before. We got to be weird. Okay, we're going to change the setting. We're going to set Richard III in like Nazi Germany. That's what he did, right? For that one, yeah. You know, we'll put it in a different setting. You know, everyone will be naked, or the costumes will be totally inappropriate to what's happening. When they do that, like you still have the music, you still have people singing the notes, and even if the singer's trying to do a good job, when it's in that kind of context, it's just, you know, it's perverse, it's destructive. It's destructive. So our last reading is going to be shortly from Phil Rubenstein. And as we get into that, I want to give a bit of a recollection of what we've been through over these 6 weeks. We looked at Plato and Cusa. We considered the difference between senses, induction from your senses, and knowledge. We talked about the provisional nature of knowledge. You're never exactly right. So when Cusa said that, that's in line with what Gödel had, that you can never know it all.
Kepler, we got actual reasons for the motions of the planets, not ChatGPT dial adjusting. Fermat, we got least time, final cause as a principle of nature, which brings up the human nature or the human quality of thought or of principles. For light to take the least time, for that to be a principle of nature, what does that say about an attempt to separate the mind from the rest of the universe? If the universe operates on something that seems like it's not mental, is not a good word, but right. And that's what Claire Sellier rejected. He said that this would be like a human giving a human nature to the universe. No. And then with Riemann, we got his work in his habilitation dissertation on the shape of space, where his goal was to avoid being constrained, but the discovery of the yet unknown truth, that's a domain for something else. And that's the domain for the future after this series. So I am going to be sending out a survey. Also, this Wednesday discussion session is mostly going to be talking about what do we do next. We can make some reading groups. I know a lot of people wanted to read Plato. There was questions about Gauss and others. So we've got some opportunities for that. And okay, let's do this. Let's read. I forget if we're online or in person. We do for in-person reader? I think. Okay, in-person reader for Phil Rubenstein.
This is on page 3 of the handout. And we're going to read just the first section, but not the very last short paragraph. So if anybody volunteer to read this?
I can read.
Go for it.
Phil Rubenstein, Hilbert, and Russell, The Suffocation of Science by Mathematics. The 20th century into the present early phase of the 21st has witnessed the near total destruction of the progress in human self-conception that occurred from the 15th century Golden Renaissance to the end of the 19th century. Then a new revolution in science was at hand in the successive breakthroughs of Bernard Riemann, Albert Einstein, and Max Planck. But the idea of human nature and nature's God that has been at the core of the American Revolution, in which drove those great scientists, was directly attacked by the likes of Bertrand Russell, who held an abiding hatred of mankind and especially science-driven industrial development. The attack was begun by a school led by the mathematician David Hilbert, which aimed to replace the human mind by logic-ruled axiomatic systems modeled on the failed Euclid. The combined impact of Hilbert's 1900 presentation to an international mathematics conference seeking to axiomatize all human knowledge and Russell's direct assault on Einstein and Planck has undermined the morality of Western civilization. Lyndon LaRouche has made clear the critical and unique role of these two characters in the horrors of the recent 100 years. The typical American, especially, would fail to understand how this could be so. How could a mathematician and a so-called philosopher have such an effect? Yeah. The fact that this question would arise indicates the problem. It is the culture, the hegemonic ideas about man and nature that determine the development of the individual and the science produced. The view of human nature expressed by Hilbert and Russell has been the leading factor in both the ending of true science and the consequent immorality. The same destructive process in music, at the same tragic historical moment, is discussed in a following article.
And then can you jump to the right column, directly to the right, what Hilbert and Russell did? Pick up reading from there.
Yes. What Hilbert and Russell did was to make deduction the only standard of truth. But with this view, there is no creative human mind that represents access to the real world. And it is the hegemony of this outlook that marks the decline of intellectual morality in the 20th century. Morality destroyed. To get at the destruction wrought by this, one has to grasp the moral dimension. This lies in the nature of LaRouche's physical economy conception, as it developed from the political and economic conception of Alexander Hamilton. The critical distinction of LaRouche's physical economy is the recognition that value in human economy is the production of a growth in the development hours of labor. This is what Hamilton calls artificial labor. It is the production of the capacity for creativity. In reality, value lies in a higher order of activity than we are presently capable of. It is the future potential, systemically, of the power and extension of the reach of that power into new domains of the universe, which is value. Value is always systemic and lies in the potential future. It can never be limited to a system. It can never be axiomatic or deductive. This is the nature of man, as economics is the science of the reproduction of the human species. We do not reproduce ourselves as animals do, merely biologically. This also gives us insight into the 20th century, its wars, its degeneration, and the seminal role of Hilbert and Russell. By their definitions, there was no human mind, no creativity, no action on the future, and therefore no moral purpose, no mission for the human species. Thus, there was no reason for the individual to exist. In fact, all of modern economics, from Adam Smith to game theory, rests itself on this premise of the amorality of the human kind. The effort to affect the future, call it government, society, or as you wish, is to be ruled out as interference in the workings of nature. From there, it is a relatively short step to treat the poor as biological failures, to countenance euthanasia for the sick and elderly, to see a war of all against all in society, and to promote depopulation, Russell's favorite. For this system of monetarism, value lies not in human beings, but in the price of financial instruments, without regard to any change in productivity. It is far from an accident that by the end of the 20th century, nearly all top investment bank and hedge fund speculative traders had been educated as mathematicians, and this continued true after the crash they brought on us in 2008. Giving up on reality. Today, we are left with a reduction of creative mind to neural networks, of justice to giving chimpanzees, nasty creatures on their own, the legal standing of persons, and a recurrence of artificial intelligence fantasies, even though this has been known to be fallacious since Plato's Parmenides. Unless we recognize that it is creativity alone that defines us and that it is also itself the standard of truth, we will fail in the mission given to us by the nature of the universe. This is what the 20th century crime of David Hilbert and Bertrand Russell has taken from us.
I'd really like to thank Phil for that. Phil Rubenstein passed away, it's going to be 5 years ago on Friday, and he was a real mentor to me, whose advice I much appreciated, and he's a wonderful guy. And if you want to think about him this weekend, you could read the full article as a way of commemorating him in your mind. So with that, I want to draw this one to a close. I thank everyone who's participated in this class series by email, by text, by chat, by Zoom, in person, by phone, all the different ways. I've really enjoyed spending my Sundays with you, and I hope we'll be seeing each other again soon, get to know each other better. So thank you, everyone.